Hey Brickmaniacs, welcome back to another Designer Studio episode. Today we're taking a little closer look at the Sea Fury, so we got Brennan joining us to talk about this awesome build. I already love the cross-element printing, the craziness we have going on here with the invasion stripes, contrasting to the kind of two-tone gray that you got going on here. Tell me a little bit about this build and how it came together.
Well, as you might eventually find, the stripes were not always intentional. There was kind of a last-minute scramble to get all those on there, and that's because I forgot to do my research. So apologies for that. But yeah, this build was a lot of fun to do. This is one of the last great piston engine fighters before we really come into the jet age.
And you were talking about the airspeed on this thing is pretty wicked.
Oh yeah, I mean these things. I mean, if you guys know the Typhoon, for example, I mean, this thing is the grandson, or great-grandson of the Typhoon.
Okay.
It's essentially, so the Typhoon, as you know, became the Tempest. And the Tempest almost became the Tempest 2, where they swapped out the Sabre. I think that was the engine they had in there, that inline with a really chunky, like, chin going on it, right? You know that look. They swapped out the Sabre with a Centaurus, I think, which is this more distinctive radial engine. And that was happening just before the end of the Second World War. And when they swapped it out, but you know, it was going to become Tempest 2, but it became its own thing. It became the Fury.
Okay.
And initially, the Fury was going to kind of usurp the Spitfire in Royal Air Force service, and then also becoming a naval fighter, the Sea Fury, which is what we have here. But as you know, time goes on, and we kind of come into the jet age, the Royal Air Force is like, well, we don't need one of these because we've got jets. They work a lot better and they're faster and all that jazz.
Thanks, but no thanks. A little too late.
But the Navy at that point, I mean, we don't really have jets flying off of carriers yet, and so they're like, we'll take them. And so, yeah, basically, it's essentially a ground aircraft that eventually they just gave a hook, an arrestor hook in the back here, and some lovely folding wings. But yeah, it's got a legacy to it.
Yeah.
As for this one in particular, the reason the stripes weren't initially going to be a part of this is because we were going to do, or the idea was to do Sawbones, which is to a degree. Sawbones is a air racer. So if you guys know the air races down in Reno, Nevada, which I've known since I was literally 1 year old.
Grew up there, yeah.
Seriously, I was down there.
Which if you've ever been to Reno, that's pretty much the only time you need to go is to see the air races.
That and apparently advertising, which is why my dad was down there. Apparently it goes really well down there. But it was originally going to be Sawbones, so we were originally going to go with a more Canadian motif, which would have been really cool, I think. We don't have a lot of Canadian aircraft in our fleet.
The only issue is that it came out during Korea Month.
Exactly, and it's like, well, wait a second. These things didn't actually, the Canadians weren't flying in Korea because they're busy getting a refit, in Canada. They're not even in the conflict. And so that's why you've got, some of the things are, you may notice here, obviously, the stripes break up a little bit. I would have 100% swapped out all the parts for that and made that a little more clean, but we were short on time
working with
that
deadlines.
point. Exactly.
Yeah, I understand.
So we get what we get. I still think it turned out really well.
Yeah, it definitely looks excellent, and it's nice to have a little representation for the Royal Navy Air Force as well, instead of just something that didn't fly.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I don't want to be the guy who has to go, well, it's my build. I don't care if it wasn't there. Screw you. So, yeah, no, and it was a lot of fun to build.
So apart from the transition from what you originally had in mind to kind of updating these printed parts, talk to me a little bit about just getting this up off the ground initially. Obviously you've got a much bigger engine integrating into a more tapered fuselage and then a much smaller wing airframe. Was there any challenges in getting that together? And it looks really sturdy. I mean, it looks swooshable beyond belief.
Well, yeah, it's slightly less sturdy than you think, but it's still pretty darn good. I mean, you can kind of pick it up, you can swoosh it around, it'll still go happily. You've got the folding wings, and so naturally, if you try to roll it too much, they'll want to bend a bit.
It'll flip a little.
I mean, we're working on it.
It's a toy.
It's a toy. What are you going to do? Yeah, as far as challenges, getting the actual shape and the width on that fuselage to look right and to then integrate into that engine, you're right. That was kind of nightmarish. But I found some use in those new, I'm pretty sure they've been around for a few years. It's those 2x2 brackets with the center piece.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You know, I got the use out of a few of those, set those up just right.
That's a good way to do it.
And essentially, the mount that's actually holding this is set in on top of those without actually connecting directly to them, and then they're connected from the sides instead of up and down.
Okay.
And so technically, the height in here, you're going to see, when you're building this, for example, you'll see that there's a brick or a plate or something like that doesn't quite connect with the studs beneath it.
But that's intentional.
But that's intentional.
Interesting.
And that helped just kind of create this nice, slick transition down here.
Yeah, because that is really clean. I mean, there's some stepping going on back here, obviously, but up front, you really don't see much of it.
It's pretty slick. And it was a lot of fun to build.
Yeah.
The wings were the other thing. I don't know if you can see very well from that angle. Let's see if we can tilt this a bit. You can see that they have just the slightest couple of degrees of dihedral. And that's conveniently at the same point where the wing folds.
Yeah, okay.
And so I was able to, it took quite a while of kind of figuring out, well, how am I going to make sure that I can fold this, keep it steady.
And represent that little dihedral swoop.
Exactly, and represent the dihedral swoop. And turns out that panels make for a great little helper when it comes to propping things up if you can get them in just the right spot. On top of that, ensuring that that the wing stays as well, or that it can fold with the hinges. We were going to have some uncovered studs, here, because that's where the plates sit right on top.
Sit against it, right?
Right, and that looked strange to me, and I realized, well, that exact point pretty much lines up with the cannons, which now that I now see the cannons here, or should be on the other side, but we'll fix that. It should be turned around on that one. This one, they're pretty much right where they're supposed to be. But that bump is the actual point at which it's actually not the drum. I figured this out the other day. It's actually the point where the feed feeds into the cannon. Okay. So the ammunition
it's like
runs,
the action almost.
Right. I think the ammunition technically runs out into the fold part of the wing, and then it just kind of
feeds
snakes in. And so then the cannons are turned in such a way that it feeds that way. So creating...
See, that is why we do these videos, because otherwise you'd have looked at it and been like, well, that's clever. You put those little gold bar pieces there so that the wing stopped when it was supposed to fold. But there's actually reason behind it. That's cool.
I love it when mistakes become intentional. Speaking of which, you can since you've got a lovely look at those cannons that Slam made, and a couple of stickers here on the front that might be a little harder to see. He hates me for those. I think they're some of the smallest stickers we've made, some of the thinnest stickers we've made before for those intakes, which are staggered because they're technically for different things. I can't remember exactly what they are. I believe one is your oil intake, another is for your supercharger, stuff like that.
Sure, okay.
But yeah, I built these gentle curves in there because if you look at the plane, it's got them. They're these very distinctive. They kind of jut out a bit, and they create these distinctive curves that have these intakes on them. And I couldn't not include that, and so I pestered.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to represent either. I mean, that's
And so I pestered him to make those for me, and we're still working on repairing the relationship. So that was a detail I thought was important. You may have noticed when I turned it to its side, you also have these lovely exhaust stacks with some kind of grime and grit from having...
It was running.
Yeah, running. Yeah. Those are very prominent on pretty much every Sea Fury I've ever seen. I was like, can't not include that. Just makes the side feel more complete, less bare. Not that it is bare. I mean, look at what we all got here. It's lovely. I can't remember exactly where 109 comes from. There was probably an inside joke that created that. But it's not the BF 109, I know that, but it comes from somewhere. And this is technically Royal Australian Navy.
Right, that's right.
Which I suppose if you didn't know, you can just pretend I didn't say that if you don't want that. Because from what we found, at least, when the Royal Australian Navy was flying in Korea, they were flying under British, off British carriers. I think the Sydney was there at least, so they did have one of their own carriers there. But they were flying, it's the same colors, with I think a slightly different marking scheme on the actual like squadron numbers
Sure.
and whatnot. So plausible deniability. If you're like, yeah, this is British, sure, we'll go with that.
You can make it whatever you want to make
Exactly. Yeah, it's not up to me. Once it's in your house, what am I supposed to do? It's a Sea Fury. Yeah, so we've got that. You've probably seen the lovely Canopy by Slam as well. I think this one came together really nicely. As much as I would love if we could have a more rounded kind of canopy like this with that very gentle hump, because that just screams bubble canopy to me so much, and yet not.
You're working with what the system provides.
With what we got, I think it looks pretty nice.
Yep, I agree.
Pretty nice. Also in there, we can open this up a little bit. Hard to see with the minifig in there, but we've got, in fact, I can pop him out for a second. You can see we've got a lovely little control panel in there, also by Slam.
You love to see it.
Love to see it. No gun sight on this one. Sorry. This one is an interesting case, actually, which we debated on creating another very small sticker that Slam said, no.
Absolutely not.
The one he would not make for me, which, don't roast him for that one. I could have pestered him more. But it's actually projected directly onto the front panel of the glass.
Sure.
This was something that they had figured out while they were still using the Tempest in the Second World War. And they realized, oh, if we just make the pane at a very particular angle.
We can just project that up there.
Yeah, it's literally just directly onto that. And it saves the bulk of having this kind of bulky gun sight in your face.
Yeah, right.
And so we were thinking about, putting something like that on there, but, we decided to go without.
Use your
Besides,
imagination.
it would have been finicky to put on. If you want to make your own stickers or have someone make some stickers,
There you go.
go for it.
Add your gun sight.
But little knowledge for you. Yeah, it's a pretty little airplane, honestly. And like I said, this is one of the last. This is kind of the dying breath of an old age. But it doesn't go. She doesn't go out with a whimper, at least. So.
Well, and yeah, obviously, if they're still running them in races too, that's pretty cool to hear.
Exactly. I mean, these things. A lot of them went to the civilian market, and so Sawbones, for example, which was based out of the airport that is directly next to my house. So I've been seeing Sawbones flying over my house for the last decade and a half.
Cool.
Which was part of why I wanted to create that. But yeah, this thing is a great little airplane. I think the one complaint I've ever heard from pilots back in the day, they were like, she doesn't handle a really rough landing well. The gear aren't quite super strong
Gotta
enough
bring her
to
down
handle
soft.
a really rough, which oddly enough is accurate in this case.
Because of that kind of forward push that they have.
Well, part of the forward push that they have, but also just the way these have been built to keep them nice and contained, is a little flimsy, and so you kind of have to be careful with them. But once you've got them where they're going to be,
The function is there.
they'll stay there.
Yeah,
They're
cool.
not going anywhere. Just don't, slap it on the back. Go get him, champ. She'll be fine. Yeah, so that's the Sea Fury.
I cover everything you want to cover?
I think so. Oh, propeller.
Yeah,
This is
okay.
this is the other bit that people called me out for in some of the posts, which I get. Sea Fury is supposed to have a 5-bladed prop. I get that, and I did a lot of looking, both through, for example, like Dan and George with their helicopters, trying to find something that's nice and concise, but also sturdy enough that you can actually
Spin it.
This one is admittedly not perfectly sturdy. You don't want to flick it by this. You want to grab it by the spinner and spin it. But it actually can spin, as opposed to a few other designs I saw where they, as far as I can understand, and from what I tried to do when I tried to build them, they just
It's stationary.
Exactly, like putting clips on like a round surface. Those things will want to move around, and eventually everything's going to be out of whack, and it just looks odd to me.
Interesting.
So I figured we'd go with the tried and true 4-blade, And if you want to pester Lego for getting me a 5-blade, I would not complain. I've been wanting one of those for a while.
There you go.
So there's always that. But yeah, that's the Sea Fury. It was a brilliant little plane in the real world. I think it's a fun little one in this one. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Yeah, and definitely a cool section of representation brought to an era that we already touch on pretty scarcely here
Exactly.
at Brickmania. So that's really cool to see. An excellent little addition and a good build, Brendan. Thank you for talking about it.
Thank you.
That will do it for the Designer Studio for the Sea Fury. Thank you very much for watching.